guys, and welcome to today's video where we are going to be talking about the conceptual devaluation of luxury fashion, i.e. why we don't see luxury items as being as valuable as they actually are. Some of the most expensive brands in the world are struggling to keep up with changing attitudes towards luxury fashion and to maintain interest in their brands with their high prices in comparison to the fast fashion that is currently dominating the fashion world. So I want to have a little bit of a deep dive as to why we as consumers are seeing luxury as less valuable than it actually is, why that's a big issue for designer brands, and what those brands are doing to try and combat this. Also, this is part one of a two-part series about the devaluation of luxury. So this video focuses on luxury products and luxury brands, and then next week's video will be about why celebrities don't want to be seen as living luxury lifestyles anymore. So make sure you are subscribed so you get notified when part two is up. So first of all, let's talk about what we mean by a luxury brand and how a brand achieves that status. So luxury brands can be defined as brands that are characterized by a high level of quality, exclusivity, and high price tags. Some of the most well-known luxury brands include Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Yves Saint Laurent, Dior, Gucci, Prada, and these brands are all held in very high prestige by the general public because of their perceived societal status and their eye-watering prices. As a society, we place these brands at the top of the fashion food chain because we believe their products to be the most high quality, often showcasing artisan craftsmanship in their runway shows, and because of the exclusivity of their products, because that scarcity makes them feel more special. And this exclusivity is generally fostered in two ways. So the first is scarcity of products, and the second is high prices. These brands have traditionally released much fewer products and in much smaller quantities than affordable everyday brands. So with less product on the market, it is seen as being more valuable to own a product from that brand by the consumer. And the high price point adds an extra layer to this because it ensures that the consumers who do get their hands on the products from these brands are affluent or are at least seen to be affluent by others, which then benefits the brand because onlookers will see those of high status wearing the brand and therefore associate that brand with wealth and status. And there are levels within luxury where price points and exclusivity differ. Ready-to-wear brands or brands which release ready-to-wear collections tend to be at the lower end of the luxury price point. So examples of these brands would be Burberry or Marc Jacobs, whilst haute couture brands have the highest level of scarcity with very few of each item made, and the items that are made cost an absolute bomb to buy. Examples of brands which are approved as haute couture by the Fédération de la Haute Couture et de la Mode, because yes, there is a council who decides who is allowed to be haute couture and who is not, would be Schiaparelli and Givenchy. And essentially, if ready-to-wear luxury is for the 1%, haute couture is for the 0.0001%, as couture pieces are often one-of-a-kind runway pieces that are worth tens of thousands of dollars and are sold through private rather than commercial sale, or are owned by the fashion house that makes them and are only loaned out to celebrities for special events such as the Met Gala. This video therefore is not about haute couture because the craftsmanship and the hours that go into making each piece means that they are very rarely seen outside of the runway or red carpet, and therefore they haven't really experienced the same devaluation that ready-to-wear luxury has. However, before we talk about devaluation, we need to talk about why valuation is so important to luxury brands. Luxury brands are, above everything else, marketing powerhouses. Marketing is absolutely everything because realistically, the prices that they charge for their products are not reflective of what the materials and the manufacturing are actually worth. The technical capabilities of tailors and the quality of fabric has a price cap that it is physically impossible to exceed. Putting together the pieces for a Louis Vuitton bag takes skill, but there's only so much skill that can ever be used in doing that. The materials can only ever reach a certain quality because that is what is physically possible. For example, leather can only be as high quality as the genetics of the cow that it comes from allows it to be. The quality difference between a piece of material used by Zara and a piece of material used by Prada is not thousands of dollars worth because the fabric is not that compositionally different, even when it has a higher thread count or came from a different source, such as real versus synthetic leather. A Prada bag will cost 50 times as much as a Zara bag, but the materials and the craftsmanship that went into the Prada bag would probably make it 2 to 3 times higher quality than the Zara bag. And both items have the same functionality. The luxury fashion industry therefore relies on marketing and customer perception in order to maintain its value, because the products, when looked at from a purely monetary perspective, taking no account of branding or name, have no way to justify their selling price. Let's take Hermes, for example. Hermes have a list of credentials for anyone to even be considered for buying their elusive Birkin bag, because they don't want just anyone to be able to walk into the store and get one. You have to have a purchase history with the brand to be considered, and you have to have a private appointment in which the salesperson will decide whether they want to offer you the opportunity to buy a bag or not. And often, if you are offered the opportunity, you will be put on a wait list, which you could be on for years before you finally get the chance to buy one. And no bag is realistically worth $300,000 unless it's literally made from diamonds, which the Birkin is not. But what gives the Birkin its value is the exclusivity and the social status that they bestow upon the person that owns them. The specialness of a designer item comes from how we as a society perceive its value. It's like how we've learned to grow diamonds in labs, for example, and yet people insist on buying the mined diamonds because they feel more real and more of a status symbol, even though the material is exactly the same. It's just the process of obtaining the diamond that differs. And because the power of a designer brand comes from its ability to improve someone's perceived status in the eyes of others that see them wearing a designer brand, these brands target the lower and the middle classes rather than the super rich. They target people who want to look rich rather than people who are rich. It's the age-old money talks but wealth whispers. The richest of the rich are not walking around in monogram print Gucci tracksuits. They're probably wearing simple clothes made by a designer that you and I have never even heard of before. Big name fashion houses and designer brands rely on middle and lower class folks to keep them in business because the billionaires are not buying from them. If people from the lower and middle class lose interest in this brand because the designer is no longer worth buying as a status symbol, then the brand loses all value because the millionaires next door and the celebrities are not buying from them. A lot of millionaires are not the classic caricature of a rich person. They are ordinary people who earn more than they spend and will most likely shop in the same places and buy the same things as everyone else who lives on their street. They value money, so they don't spend it on Rolexes or Prada bags, and so you would never know from looking at them that they are rich. And they are not the people that these brands are targeting, because these are people who are secure in their wealth, who don't need to buy designer brands in order to show that they are wealthy, because they don't care about that. The people they're targeting are the people who don't necessarily have that money, but who want to look like they do. And celebrities get sent designer items for free because it's free marketing. They don't pay for the mega expensive jewels or bags or shoes that you see them wearing. They either get lent them for events or sent them as PR, because then wearing those brands is what helps push the agenda that if us ordinary people buy from that brand, we can increase our societal status because celebrities are seen as being part of high society. And people save all of their pennies to spend on their favorite designer on one item or on the it brand of the moment. So those designers need to keep up the illusion that wearing their brand will imply status and wealth to ensure that the big ticket item that that person buys is from them rather than from another brand. And designers need people to want to be in the it club. And that's why they tell their store assistants to be rude to you, because it makes you want to win their approval by showing that you can afford to buy from that brand and you are worthy of buying from that brand. People who are secure in their wealth will leave a store if they are treated badly by the sales assistant, whereas a person who is insecure in their money will be made to want that item more to show that they are worthy of it. If the brand loses their air of exclusivity, then no one will buy from them because their products themselves do not justify the price tags without a high value brand name attached to them. And if we're talking about fashion, there is one elephant in the room, which is fast fashion. Obviously, it's no secret that in the last 10 to 20 years, the fashion industry has become dominated by cheap, direct-to-consumer brands introducing new items to their collections every single day and offering consumers a huge variety of pieces at relatively low prices. Fast fashion is the antithesis to luxury fashion. It's accessible, it's about quantity rather than quality, and it doesn't care for originality of designs. However, the popularization of fast fashion has left a lasting impact on the luxury fashion industry. Firstly is the significant reduction in the length of a trend cycle. As a result of brands like Shein uploading thousands of new items to their website each week, The shelf life of a trend has hugely reduced from what it was 20 years ago because items quickly become old news as new ones are introduced and replace them, especially with things like shopping apps where you can scroll through the app every day and see what's new. 20 years ago, you would have had to go into a store to see what's new, whereas now when consumers are constantly having these new items presented to them, it's much easier for a trend to go out of fashion quickly because people have new items at their fingertips every single day. And microtrends have definitely become more of a thing in recent years because instead of having, say, 5 ultra trendy products at a time, for example, the juicy couture tracksuits, low-rise jeans and baby t-shirts, which were all staples of 2000s fashion and were trendy for multiple years before going out of fashion, now the abundance of items means that trends such as cow print, mini Ugg boots, buying everything in the colour brown are only lasting for a few months before people move on to the next trend. And this has caused a change in consumer behaviour where people, particularly younger consumers, are able to buy more items than their counterparts in the 2000s would have, and there's a definite preference amongst my age group, for example, for buying a few items often rather than saving up and buying one expensive item because fast fashion gives younger consumers the ability to keep up with microtrends without breaking the bank. As such, there was a subsequent decline in demand for luxury fashion amongst younger people because it doesn't feel worth it anymore to invest hundreds or thousands of pounds into an item that will go out of fashion in a few months and for which they could have got a dupe from Shein for a fraction of the price. To keep up with the fast fashion girlies, most luxury brands have ditched the traditional schedule of 2 big collections a year, which were spring, summer and autumn, winter, and instead have started releasing a collection per season plus pre-release collections such as resort, aka holiday clothes released in winter, and pre-fall, so they're now dropping new items around once a month to keep up with the fluidity that fast fashion offers through a constant stream of new pieces. And designer brands are definitely being undermined by hyper short microtrend cycles caused by fast fashion brands wherein consumers struggle with the idea of saving up to buy one staple product because A, fashion and trends move so quickly now that whatever you buy from a designer could go out of fashion in 2 months and then you've wasted hundreds of dollars on it when you could have spent $10 on the fake and taken less of a financial hit. B, designer brands are finding it harder to create timeless staple products that appeal to the middle and lower class customers because we have so many cheap fast fashion options that it's hard to narrow down what expensive item you think you might use for years and therefore you should invest your money into. And C, because designers are releasing 4 season collections a year now, so as someone with not much disposable income, that doesn't feel encouraging to buy one of those items because it's going to become old news just as fast as the dupe from Shein would. I don't feel like what I'm seeing on designer shelves now are investment pieces anymore. I feel like they are a higher quality but overpriced version of whatever is trendy right now, and they're going to go out of style at the same rate that the Shein version will. And this is not to say buy from Shein, please don't do that. But it's important to show that even the designer brands who try their hardest to appear to be exclusive and be perceived to be the highest quality and consider themselves leaders in what is trendy are becoming fast fashionified, and that's reducing the value that we see in those brands. Investment pieces are purported to be something special that would increase in value over time, and with the more pieces that we're seeing designers spit out every year and the less stable pieces we're seeing them spit out every year, the less worth it is to buy an investment piece from Gucci or Louis Vuitton because realistically the price is not going to increase that much over time when there are so many items to choose from. Birkins are like the granddaddy of investments. They are the most expensive investment piece. But they're also a pretty fragile investment because at the end of the day, it's still a bag. It's still susceptible to stains or rips or bits falling off it. If you have an overexcited puppy in your house, they can ruin your Birkin. Really, if you're going to invest in something and you're not able to throw $300,000 down the drain potentially, a Birkin is not going to be for you. And from the perspective of investment pieces, resellers who massively inflate the price of items from mass market brands are causing huge problems for the luxury fashion market in terms of marketing themselves as the best place to make an investment. When a pair of Nike Dunks or Jordan 1s increase by 200% in value directly after they are put on sale, why would you invest thousands of dollars into a single designer handbag that will take years to give you a return when you could just buy a few pairs of those shoes and turn an instant profit? Personally, I very much dislike resellers. I don't think people should be able to make their living off of buying the entire stock of a product just to double the price and sell it on, because brands like Nike price their items at what they're worth. So why would I pay £300 for a pair of shoes that Nike only thinks is worth £130? But this part of the video is not about my personal hatred for everyone who bought up the entire stock of the Nike Dunks in Orange Pearl because I desperately wanted them and I couldn't get them. This is about the problems that resellers are causing for the valuation of designer brands. And the most in-demand resale items on websites like StockX are not from brands like Gucci or Chanel. They're from premium streetwear brands like Stussy, Supreme, Palace, Off-White, Babe, etc. And those are the brands that the younger demographic are the most interested in investing in, not ready-to-wear brands, because the resale value of those brands is currently much higher. Those brands would be considered bridge brands on the fashion pyramid because they bridge the gap between high-end brands like Dior and Prada and mass market brands like Zara, H&M or Uniqlo, because their items are of premium quality, but they are sold widely and their target consumer is the mass market shopper who is willing to invest more money into a higher quality item but not go as far as a ready-to-wear brand. Other non-streetwear brands in this category would include Coach, Kate Spade and Diesel, wherein their items are perceived to be of a much better quality than a mass market brand, but their prices reflect the quality of the item rather than the exclusivity associated with the brand name. However, now that reselling has become such a big thing, particularly in the streetwear community, brands like Jordan and Supreme are starting to gain reputation for exclusivity because their drops are limited and the items released in each drop generally don't come back on the website again. Resellers are taking advantage of these limited drops to sell items from bridge brands at ready-to-wear prices, thus diluting the value of a ready-to-wear item because people see those items as costing the equivalent of an item from Supreme or Off-White, which are obviously brands in the fashion world that are considered to be a lot lower on the fashion pyramid than ready-to-wear brands like Gucci or Chanel. For example, this pair of Nike by Off-White blazers, which originally retailed for $130, are now being sold for £1,200, which equates to roughly $1,500, which is more than a 10 times increase in value since they were first put on sale in 2017. In comparison, a brand new pair of trainers from Louis Vuitton will set you back between £800 to £900 or $1,000 to $1,100. So in terms of current value, a pair of trainers designed by a premium streetwear bridge brand and released 6 years ago are worth more than a pair of trainers from a ready-to-wear designer brand. Obviously, this is a single example. Not every pair of Nike blazers is going to sell for £1,200, so don't start getting excited at the prospect of how much your old trainers might be worth. But I think this perfectly demonstrates how the huge growth in interest in streetwear items and the subsequent growth in the resale value of those items is undermining the value of luxury brands. Because if a shoe from Nike is harder to get your hands on than a shoe from Louis Vuitton, Louis Vuitton's strategy of marketing itself as one of the most exclusive commercial brands on the market is not working. And resellers are not the only ones dampening the exclusivity of designer brands. Counterfeiting has always been an issue for designer brands, with marketplaces in countries like China, Turkey and Hong Kong being known for selling thousands of counterfeit designer products for decades. But with the rise in online shopping and an ever-increasing number of sole traders and independent sellers opening shops on websites like AliExpress, Depop and Etsy, there's been a massive uptick in the number of counterfeit items for sale. When counterfeits were restricted to certain marketplaces where intellectual property laws were lax or it was difficult for brands to enforce their intellectual property rights against those counterfeiters, this wasn't so much a problem. But nowadays, the globalization of those counterfeit items is a big problem. So counterfeiting is obviously an illegal practice because it infringes the intellectual property rights of a brand being counterfeited, whether that be from using the brand's trademark, such as their name or their logo, without their permission, or through copyright or design infringement by copying the appearance of a particular product. As a brief example, Fendi have a trademark for their FF print, and therefore anyone who uses this print on a product without a license from Fendi is infringing this trademark. In the past, I don't think counterfeits have been that much of an issue for brand reputation because A, they were confined to small markets, and B, counterfeited products were generally pretty easy to spot because there would be something that's off about them. So for example, instead of having an FF print, they might have an LL print that was similar but easily spotted as a fake, or the brand name would be slightly off. So instead of Christian Dior, it would be Christian Dior. So from a distance, it would look like a Dior bag, but as soon as you got close up to it, you'd know that it wasn't. But nowadays, counterfeits are much more of a problem for two reasons. Firstly, the fact that they're absolutely everywhere. It's no longer just independent markets in specific countries that are selling counterfeit items. There are big brands making dupes for designer products, particularly one brand who are really bad for this is Ego. They duped the red boots from Mischief, they duped the satin Versace platforms, and they've duped all the Van Cleef Clover jewellery. I don't know how they get away with it. Like, they are literally the Aldi of the fashion world, but somehow they do, and they are not the only ones doing it. Brands are seeing super popular items be replicated and counterfeited by hundreds of independent sellers on places like Etsy and in marketplaces. Like, I strolled through Camden Market last weekend, and almost every single jewellery store had a rip-off Van Cleef bracelet on their store front. And as soon as a designer item becomes popular, suddenly every man and their dog will be wearing it, because there are so many places where you can buy a fake version that looks just like the real version. And that completely diminishes the value of this designer version, because there's no exclusivity, and even if you have the real product, people are going to assume it's fake because of how many people have the fake version. It's a catch-22 for designers, because either they design things that are commercially very successful but are then ripped off by thousands of independent sellers and therefore lose any exclusivity and value because no one's going to spend hundreds of pounds on the real version when everyone is going to assume it's fake anyway, or they design pieces that are less trendy and less commercially successful to maintain the perceived value of that piece, but they lose out on the publicity because less people are talking about their item. You know, everyone still recognises Van Cleef as the originator of that design. They just don't care to buy the real version because it doesn't seem like it's worth £20,000 when the fakes are so easy to get hold of for like 20 quid. And this leads to the second problem that designer brands are now facing, which is that counterfeits over the past 10 years or so have hugely increased in quality to the point that an ordinary person would often not be able to tell the difference between the real item and the fake version. Companies are no longer using like quirky variations of the brand name or the design in order to avoid IP infringement. They are unashamedly committing IP infringement by copying almost every aspect of the design. But because so many sellers are doing it, it's really difficult for brands to actually tackle them and get the fakes removed from sale, especially when the sellers are individuals selling in marketplaces either in person or on places like Facebook or Depop. It would be a gigantic headache for these brands' legal teams to try and take down every single seller ripping off their designs, and it would be basically impossible because they would be playing a game of whack-a-mole where for every seller you take down, 5 more are going to pop up. And LVMH have actually come up with a new technique to try and tackle counterfeiting through using blockchain technology to assign a unique identifier to every item produced, which will then act as a certificate of authentication whenever that item is resold. However, this technology will only tackle the problem of people who are trying to buy the real thing getting ripped off by being sent a fake. This doesn't tackle the problem of people deliberately buying the fake because it looks exactly the same, and why pay £1,600 when you could pay £16? Because the value of a designer item comes from its societal status and what it kind of bestows upon the holder, this is a huge problem for brands, because when everyone has a Louis Vuitton bag, this brand loses any exclusivity and loses any status that it could grant you by buying the real thing, so people just simply are not going to buy the real thing. You know, as we said previously, ready-to-wear brands target the middle and lower classes. They target people who want to buy their items in order to look rich to other lower and middle class people. So if the item does not do that for them because every single person has one, they're not going to buy it, and these brands are going to lose a big chunk of their value because the people that they should appeal to don't hold them in as high prestige because their items are being held by everyone within that class of wealth. And another reason that I think the traditional target audience for luxury brands are not buying items from said luxury brands is the increased accessibility of designer vintage. There are a lot of online boutiques and brick and mortar thrift stores nowadays that are selling vintage designer stock, and don't get me wrong, the stuff is not cheap, but it's around 1/10 of the price of a new item for that brand. So if you don't care about buying a used item, these vintage stores have now become an easy way for people to get their designer fix for a fraction of the price. And this is especially so because a lot of the items sold by these online boutiques are noticeably designer, i.e. they have the signature print or they have an identifiable brand marker. So when people are buying designer to make them look richer, These vintage pieces are doing that job perfectly, especially because the trends that we're seeing become popular now are often trends from the 90s and the 2000s. Items from those eras are now considered vintage. So if people are buying a 2000s vintage piece, it's going to give you a style similar to what is popular now at a fraction of the price of buying that item from the brand now. For example, this vintage Burberry Novacek shoulder bag was sold by, I think it's I'm Designs, it might be Im Designs, for £150. And this is a brand I followed for multiple years. I trust that they authenticate and verify all of their stock. So this is, in my opinion, a genuine Burberry bag with a distinct Burberry print for £150. In contrast, to buy this Novacek bag new from Burberry would set you back £1,200, so nearly 10 times the price of the vintage one. There's obviously only a limited number of authentic vintage products that exist because they are secondhand, you can't just make more of them, but good condition vintage items being sold for such a low price in comparison to new items is reducing the appeal of buying luxury items new for consumers who are looking more for the status value of owning a luxury item than the design of the item itself. And the rise in the number of consumers choosing to buy vintage rather than new items has also come around as a result of the push for sustainability, which is being driven by a lot of younger customers who are increasingly aware of the environmental impact of their shopping. Sustainably, to put it simply, is not designer brand's strong point. Most consumers understand that when something is made from sustainable, recyclable materials and is made using sustainable techniques or technology, it's inevitably going to cost more than if it was made from polyester in a sweatshop in China. However, the luxury fashion industry does not have great sustainability credentials to justify the prices they charge. In 2018, Burberry were exposed for burning/destroying unsold products worth a total of £28.6 million during that year, with the total stock destroyed over the past 5 years reaching a value of £90 million. And their justification for that was that they needed to destroy those products in order to protect their brand. For most brands, when they have stock that is not selling very well, they will mark down the prices enough to encourage consumers to buy it in order to clear out warehouse space. However, with luxury brands, you will very rarely ever see products on sale on their websites because the products are priced to reflect the value of the brand name attached to them. So if they were to reduce that price, it would imply to the customer that the product was not worth its full selling price, or that the brand name is only worth the sale price rather than the original retail price. The one exception to this is designer outlets like Bicester Village, for example, but for the most part, brands will not reduce the price of their products and will instead keep them on the website at full price until they run out of warehouse space, at which point they will destroy the products rather than do anything else with them. They refuse to donate any unsold products because giving things away for free to the needy would devalue their brand, because then they would have people who use charities, for example, wearing their brand, which is not what they want. They want people who are rich and wealthy wearing their brand. And they also can't slow their production because then they can't keep up with the fast fashion brands. So instead, they overproduce and they destroy any unsold stock once it's out of season. And Burberry are not the only brand to do this. The entire industry is guilty of it, with Coach exposed on TikTok for slashing unsold bags from their stores before throwing them in the bin so that people who might look through their garbage couldn't just pick up a Coach bag and take it because it was rendered worthless by being cut up. And these activities obviously have a significant carbon impact from both the emissions wasted gathering the material and manufacturing the product and the emissions from actually destroying the product. And in Burberry's case, they claimed to have captured the energy from burning the products to make it environmentally friendly, but realistically, burning nearly £30 million worth of stock is never going to be environmentally friendly. And the problem for luxury brands is that in order to keep their shareholders happy, they have to keep expanding and they have to keep up their reputation for exclusivity, which they can't do if they're seen to be donating their products or putting them on sale for much lower prices. So there's a paradox between what the target consumer wants versus what the shareholders driving the ship want. And a study by Forbes found that previously, baby boomers perceived luxury brands to be inherently sustainable due to the high quality and scarcity of items. However, the new generation of consumers, i.e. Gen Z and millennials, are much more skeptical. And as such, in the past, luxury brands have avoided talking about their sustainability credentials because it was a much uglier side of their business versus the idyllic, picture-perfect lifestyle that portrayed in their ad campaigns. But with a generation of more sustainability-minded consumers driving the majority of luxury sales growth in previous years, brands that aren't facing up to it are going to see a decline in interest. A couple of brands have started the journey towards being more sustainable. So Coach have launched Coachtopia, a sub-brand which makes products from at least 50%. I've put here at least 50% materials. Yeah, it'll be 100% materials. Products from at least 50% recycled materials. Designs products to be easily taken apart so that the components can be reused, and has committed to taking back any unwanted Coachtopia products once the consumer is finished with them, to avoid them going to landfill and to reuse the materials for new products. This is obviously a great brand vision to have. However, these pillars of this brand only apply to Coachtopia, they don't apply to actual Coach. So there's still a way for them to go. And one other significant announcement recently came from the Kering Group, which owns Gucci and Yves Saint Laurent, who have said that they are committed to reducing the group's emissions by 40% by 2035. And the way that they plan to do this is by reducing the amount of products that they make and increasing the price on the items that they do sell. This is guised as a sustainability move, but I think this is also a fight back against the devaluation of luxury brands, because by further increasing the prices, they are attempting to regain some exclusivity, because even less people will be able to afford their products. However, I've yet to see a brand address one of the biggest sustainability issues in luxury fashion, which is working conditions. Brands are known to employ undocumented workers from China via third-party agency companies in order to keep their own hands clean of those contracts. And those workers are then exploited with long hours, few breaks, and no medical insurance, which are conditions similar to what we berate fast fashion brands for. And it takes the value away from those products when you learn that they were made in the same sweatshop conditions that the $10 H&M dupe was made in. And brands use the Made in Italy label to imply quality over labels like Made in China. But now we know that actually, even though the factories are based in Italy, the working conditions are the same and they are bringing workers over from places like China, that label doesn't hold as much prestige. And in the Know the Chain 2021 Apparel and Footwear Benchmark Report, which assesses working conditions across the fashion sector, the luxury fashion subsector scored on average lower than apparel retail, with Adidas scoring the highest at 89 out of 100 and Prada scoring the lowest at 5 out of 100, proving that a higher price tag does not translate to workers being paid more fairly for their craftsmanship, even if said craftsmanship requires more skill than putting together an Adidas t-shirt. With the conversation around sustainability heating up, so has the conversation around workers' rights, and whilst brands seem to be embracing environmentally friendly manufacturing processes in some way or another, their lack of address for allegations of unfair working conditions is not going to help them maintain their luxury perception amongst a new generation of conscious customers. And what I find really interesting when talking about how luxury brands are going to maintain their relevance in a new digital age is the refusal of a lot of these brands to work with influencers, despite influencer marketing being worth billions of dollars and growing exponentially every single year. Influencers are the newest and currently one of the most effective marketing tools for brands, because their relatability means that consumers will often trust an influencer's promotion of something over a promotion coming directly from the brand, because the perception is that we know that influencer well enough to know that they would only ever try and sell us a good product. Obviously, this is not the case for all influencers. There are influencers who I definitely would not trust, and actually probably if I saw them promoting something, I would decide I would never ever buy that product. But for the most part, the reason that influencer marketing is so valuable is because it feels more genuine than traditional brand to consumer marketing. So whilst it seems like influencers are the in thing, and therefore it's stupid for luxury brands to avoid using them, the relatability of influencers is exactly why they don't want to be associated with them. Luxury brands have spent decades building up their reputation for catering to only those who deserve it, either by being wealthy or by being famous enough to get the product sent to them for free. So if they work with influencers who are generally regarded as being normal people who happen to have something about them that makes people want to check in with what they're up to or hear what they have to say, then it removes that air of us and them that those brands need in order to sell their products to lower and middle class customers. Very few influencers have broken through that mold. Emma Chamberlain is the only one who comes to mind as having managed to successfully convince designer brands that they should endorse her and invite her to events, with influencers for the most part being left out of the most prestigious designer shows at Fashion Week. However, despite the industry's general distaste towards associating with influencers, that hasn't stopped influencers from associating with them. And I think this is one of the biggest reasons why people who've grown up with social media see owning luxury items as much less of a big deal than it actually is. Certain influencers, like Jeffree Star and Rice Gum, for example, made it their entire personality to flex their wealth. And when a man who reviews makeup and fights with other influencers for a living has a closet full of Birkin bags, the viewer is not going to associate Hermes with the highest level of class that they want people to associate with them. Hermes has spent so long carefully curating a selection process for the Birkin bag, and yet Jeffree Star has multiple of them, which, even though we know he's filthy rich, we know that he has a lot of money, makes us as viewers see the Birkin as slightly less valuable because he's not known for being part of high society, he's known as being a super rich YouTuber. And the increasing perception as designer as more accessible as a result of influencers showing off an abundance of designer items is killing the marketing strategy used by most designer brands, which is, if you wear our items, other people will think you're rich, so you should buy our items. But there's nothing that they can do about it, because if an influencer has the money, then these brands can't stop them from buying their items and flexing them online. And because influencers have become such a normalized part of our lives, we all follow them, whether it be on watching their YouTube videos or their TikToks or following them on Instagram or Twitter. The more influencers have these designer items, the more accessible these designer items are going to start to seem, because at the end of the day, influencers are ordinary people who manage to build a platform. They aren't seen as ethereal people like celebrities are, and we relate to them. So it's almost that feeling of, if they can own it, then I can own it too. You know, if they can buy a Gucci bag, I can also buy a Gucci bag. And the more influencers we see owning a Gucci bag, the more normalized owning a Gucci bag will become. I've seen tweets from people saying that their kids have asked for designer items for Christmas or birthdays because watching streamers or YouTubers or TikTokers who show that stuff off so often has given them no perception of how valuable that item actually is. And they start thinking that the cost of that isn't really that much, when really, for ordinary people like their parents, it is very expensive. And these kids have no grasp on the value of designer because it's being shoved in their faces so often that they think owning designer is normal. So I would assume that even though it's less obvious with people who are, like, for example, my age, I'm 21, we most likely view designer items as being more valuable than a 21-year-old in 2003 would have, because it seems like every influencer is wearing designer nowadays. So subconsciously, we're going to start to normalize that. Unfortunately for luxury brands, there's not much they can do about that except think of an entirely new marketing strategy so they can maintain their exclusive image in a different way, which I don't think that they will be able to do, because every single luxury brand relies on the same marketing strategy, and without that, their brand basically has the same value as a bridge brand. So I'm not confident that they'll be able to come up with something new. They can, of course, continue to put their prices up, but when there's so many simultaneous elements contributing to the devaluation of luxury, from resale of mass market items to counterfeits to influencers, it would be basically impossible for a brand to tackle all of those problems in one fell swoop. And I'll be interested to see how the industry fights back, because right now there's not a lot of movement on it. I think brands are kind of unsure of the best way forward, and I mean, their sales aren't dropping by any means, so maybe they just don't care. But over time, I think the gradual devaluation of luxury in the eyes of the consumer is going to become more of a problem, and is going to need to be tackled if these brands want to keep up the image that they've spent, in some cases, centuries building. So for now, that is my final thoughts on the conceptual devaluation of luxury fashion. A really catchy title, if I do say so myself. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like, leave a comment with any thoughts that you might have, and make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss part 2 coming next week, where we're going to talk about the devaluation of celebrity status. I'll leave a few videos linked in the description if you want to watch any of those, along with the videos that I used for research for this video. But apart from that, I will hopefully see you all in my next one. Bye guys!